Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Hello, this is Phoenix Soleil, and I am a partner co-owner at Lift Economy. Lift Economy is an impact consulting firm that is committed to creating an economy that benefits all life. And we're doing a series on restorative justice. And the passion here is, in order to create an economy that works for all life, we also need to create systems that instead of being punitive and then creating more of a problem because you have more recidivism, we're creating a system where it is actually repairing and supporting people in creating a new life. My guest today is Gerald Partridge. I call him Jerry. He's a retired career prosecutor. He was introduced to restorative justice as a means for resolving sensitive and complex criminal cases by the Mennonite community during his second term as the Washington County Attorney. And he has continued to use our restorative justice for the balance of his career as a prosecutor. He has continued to use RJ beyond a retirement and as a facilitator. I'll say a few more words. He received his instruction in victim offender reconciliation and circle peacemaking from the federal tutorial judge Barry Stewart and from the Ora Schwab organizations. And he's also trained and served as a mediator with the Iowa Mediation Service. He's a member of the National Association of Community and Restorative Justice. All right, Jerry, I'm so excited to have you here and to help our listeners understand more about what is possible when we use restorative process as an alternative to our system. Maybe you could start by saying, how did you come to the work that you're doing? What inspired you to do this work?
Well, Phoenix, thank you very much for having me. It's a real honor. I've always had a passion for justice. And I grew up in a small town in Illinois that had an integrated school. And I watched basically firsthand the discrimination that was inflicted on my classmates and I played sports, so on my teammates. And so I was really engaged with the whole civil rights movement in the 60s. At the church where my brothers and I grew up, the priest there had gone to college with Martin Luther King. And so all of us basically got an education not only in church matters, the Episcopal Church, but matters of civil rights. And then, of course, Vietnam came along, and that was, in my view, even though I served in the Navy, that was another really strong indication of injustice. And then after I got through law school and started as a prosecutor, the whole purpose of being a prosecutor is to pursue justice. And I thought the first time I got elected into that office that I knew what justice was. And then I ended up coming under the influence, as you said in the introduction, by the Mennonites. And we can get into sort of how they influenced me, but it changed my whole outlook on what justice was. And there are some cases that I don't immediately think of as restorative justice cases, child abuse cases and first-degree murder cases. But so many other cases really lend themselves to just putting the person who's been harmed, if they wish to, meet with the person who harmed them. And in the model that I use, I actually bring in the arresting officer or the investigating officer so that everybody can sit in circle and use a talking piece. And what emerges from those conferences is so much more just than just the idea that I had when I first started out, where you hear about people using phrases like, if they do the crime, they do the time. People get what they deserved. It's a very revengeful, retributive environment. And it's a culture. It's a culture that when I got out of law school and started prosecuting, that I was part of. So, long story short, justice has been precious. It's been a precious value for me. And I finally found, after 40 plus years in nailing 'em, jailing 'em world, that restorative justice is a much more sane and positive and if you're going to build a civilization and a society, restorative justice really should be the cornerstone.
Wow, the strong words. And I would love to hear more about how you think restorative justice addresses where traditional criminal justice system doesn't. You've been in it. So kind of lead us from your point of view. In what ways is it inefficient or ineffective? And how does restorative justice address those lacks?
When you look at something like my wife plants in our yard and does landscaping in our yard, and you can see the beautiful flowers and the beautiful fruit and the beautiful vegetables that grow out of those plants. You can really tell whether something is effective by the fruit that it produces. So the criminal justice system, look at the fruit that it produces. Over 2 million people behind bars, enormous racial inequality, racial disproportionality. Within years of retiring as an elected prosecutor, I began working in the prisons, and it is shocking. I live in Iowa, and I went to the Iowa prisons, and I think it's about a 13% Black population in Iowa, and the prisons look like they're between 50 and 70% Black. And there's a whole lot of reasons. Legislatures make laws, and the people that politic to become legislators want to be tough on crime. Nobody campaigns to get elected to be soft on crime. And so what does tough on crime mean? It means increasing the number of events that you make criminal acts, like possessing drugs or distributing drugs. And it really is the drug laws, just to set aside, make a little footnote here. It really is the drug laws that generated the huge disproportionality. They basically target, in the enforcement of the drug laws, they really target the racial minorities, and that's reflected in the courts. Another thing is the school to prison pipeline. Our system is creating basically a pipeline for kids to get in trouble. They get expelled, they get in the system, and then the legislature has empowered prosecutors and judges to basically send people off. At the same time, they've reduced commitments to mental health and substance abuse treatment. And so people get caught up with criminal acts on their surface, but the underlying mental illness or the substance abuse problem is never addressed. So those people end up in the system as well. Iowa has one of the lowest recidivism rates in the country. It's around 30 to 33%. It went down a little bit with COVID, but in big cities like Philadelphia, the recidivism rate is over 50%. So imagine people are continuing to recycle, and they go into the prison and they learn how to be more serious criminals. They learn how to disable burglar systems, alarm systems, how to peel a safe, a term I'd never heard before. They learn how to be worse criminals. And once they get that felony label on them, they can't get jobs. So I'm just kind of rattling off here all the bad fruit that the criminal justice system creates. Having told you that, I haven't had, in the more than 10 years when I was a prosecuting attorney, and I diverted cases out of the criminal justice system and into a model of restorative justice, I haven't had, and then another 5 years since I've retired, I haven't had probably more than 100 cases. But imagine, out of those 100 cases in my jurisdiction, all but 2 of those cases were dismissed. That is, they never led to even the label of felony conviction. And of course, they never led to any prison time. None of the cases that were referred for restorative justice wasted the tens of thousands of dollars of a trial. So what happened to those restorative justice cases? Not a one of them ever committed a crime again. Okay, so I had 100% or a 0% recidivism rate. I'm in one county out of 99 counties in Iowa. One county. If each prosecutor in these 99 counties took one case per month, and so you take 12 months times 99 counties, and you could save hundreds of people going into the system. And if they had even close to the low recidivism rate that I'm describing, you've created a better world. You've created a safer world. You've created a world where you've converted someone who was on a track to become a worse criminal and be back in the system over and over again. You've created a law-abiding, productive person who has a job. And we can get into the details of this, but during the Restorative Justice Conference, one of the main goals is we try to get the person who committed the offense we try to set them up into a community service situation where they can meet somebody and get connected and get a job. If you talk to anybody in corrections and find out the one magic moment or the one piece of the puzzle that changes a person from being one who commits criminal acts to someone who becomes a productive member of the community, it is a job. Get them a job. And so one of the things restorative justice tries to do, or at least it tends to do, is eliminate the conviction. You eliminate the conviction and you don't send the person into prison, and you set them up to get a job. And so, again, I'm rambling a bit, but restorative justice is a creative process. You create something new. You put these people together who have a stake in the case, and they start seeing each other as human beings. They're seeing each other, you might say, as they're all become good Samaritans to one another. They are their brother's keeper. And so the criminal justice system is nail them, jail them. You do the crime, you do the time, you get what you deserve. And restorative justice does it better.
I would really appreciate this. And I'm using a word, recidivism, and I want to just make sure people understand that that's doing the crime again.
The way the FBI tracks this stuff, or the Department of Justice tracks this stuff, is they call recidivism recommitting the crime within 1 year of your release. In talking to the prosecutor in Philadelphia, if you expanded the recidivism examination to 3 years, the recidivism rate in Philadelphia goes up to 70%. So, the people, when they get out, they don't necessarily get caught within 1 year. I mean, so the statistics are even worse. They're even worse than what the Department of Justice or FBI, reports publicly. And that's why you have overcrowding in the prisons. That's why you have privatization of prisons. It's an industry. Yeah,
there are people who are making money from it. I want to help the people who are listening in understand more about what happens in a restorative practice. Like, from your point of view, take us through, first of all, one of the things I'm thinking about is, why would a victim want this? Like, what's in it for them? I mean, is this a sacrifice they're making? Like, why would someone who's been a recipient of a crime want to go through this route? And then what happens if they choose to?
The big question, the big item that is the answer to that question is, most people who have been victims of crime want to know why. Why did you do it to me? And it's astonishing, in the burglary cases, the person feels so totally violated. Someone came into their house. They went into their bedroom. They went through their private things. Even, this is a situation where the burglar went in when there wasn't anybody home. And that's normally the case. But it's an occupied structure. It's a house. People are living there. They have their belongings in there. They have their private matters in that house. They want to know why. Why did you pick my house? And the answers are usually, I picked your house because your lawn hadn't been mowed. I saw the newspapers piled up on the front porch. I noticed you didn't have a dog. There were no lights on for 2 nights in a row, so I knew you were gone. And that's why I picked your house. And the victim is going, you're kidding me. You mean you didn't even know who I was? You didn't know that I lived there? You didn't know all of the things about my life? You didn't know anything about me at all? And I don't know how to describe it, but there's some sort of weight that gets lifted off of the person who is harmed when they actually hear the story. And they also start saying, man, that was really stupid. I should have had someone picking up my mail. I should have had one of those timers on my lights. Should have had someone mow the lawn, and sometimes you actually, I know it's hard to believe, but there's actually laughter in the circle when people start going back and forth and they realize it's not me. He didn't do it because it was me. He did it just because my house was an easy place to go. I'll tell you the horrible cases, the vehicular homicide cases, because a drunk driver doesn't have any intention of hurting anybody. They normally just want to get home in one piece, and then they end up running over a pedestrian or a bicyclist or a child. And the parents or the loved ones of that victim, they want to confront the person that did it. They want to confront them and get it off their chest. A woman in Knoxville, Illinois, was the mother of one of 3 kids killed, 19-year-old kids killed by a drunk driver. And all she wanted to do was just tell that drunk driver how much pain he caused. And so the reasons are all over the chart, but there's something inside some people, maybe all people, that want some kind of reconciliation. And you cannot prescribe when you're preparing people for a restorative justice circle. You can't say, now, if you only find a way to forgive them, your life will go on. You don't say anything. You don't even get close to something like that. And yet, so often the person harmed will look at the perpetrator and say, I forgive you. Now, I'd need a degree in psychology, I think, to be able to offer some explanation of how that comes about. And so I've come up with a word I call alchemy, where the ancient guys used to have the wizard change the lead into gold, or the wizard would claim he could change the lead into gold. That's as close as I'm going to get as a lawyer to look at this situation and try and figure out how could that victim, how could that person that's been harmed so severely, how could they forgive the person that harmed them? How could that be? And yet there it is. And what happens after that is that what I was talking about, the weight being lifted, you see this weight being lifted. And I don't understand it. At the same time, it's, and I don't want to get religious or spiritual, but it's sacred. When you see people forgive somebody that hurt them, and then you find the person that receives that forgiveness, suddenly their whole complexion and demeanor changes also. And it's not uncommon in the 15 years I've done this. In fact, I'd have to struggle to think of a case where someone didn't start crying. It's that emotional. It's like a crucible. That circle is like a crucible. And so to start with your question, why would somebody meet? I don't know. But that's the first call that I make. When a case gets referred to me, I call the person harmed and say, there's this thing called restorative justice. Here's how it works. Would you have any interest in meeting with that person? In fact, can I just ramble on? I'll tell you another story. I don't accept child sexual abuse cases. At the same time, I have a higher value called agency. If a child sexual abuse victim, let's say now they've become 18 and they're making their own decisions, if they say they want to meet, let's say they call the prosecutor, say, I want to meet with this guy. We had a case like that a year ago where the victim called the prosecutor and says, I want to meet with this guy. And the prosecutor was so uncomfortable with that, but they ended up doing it. I wasn't involved directly in the case, but here's a case that I have much more direct knowledge of. And before I share it, I want people to hear this. In the criminal court, these aren't juvenile cases that I deal with. They're not social work cases. They're not civilian cases, layperson cases. They are criminal cases. Someone has been charged publicly. You can look in the paper and see their name. You can read the police blotter and see what they were charged with. And why I'm telling you this is I don't practice confidentiality. When we meet in circle, I don't practice confidentiality. There's a commitment by the prosecutor to the defense that nothing that's said by the defendant can be used against him. But the point is, I can talk about these cases. And some of the people that have been involved in them have actually said, use my name. Use my name. I want people to know this changed my life. Use my name. So back to the case I was going to tell you about, this child wanted to meet with her uncle, who was the perpetrator. He was in prison. The mother said, there's no way in the world I'm going to let you do that. Well, the mother ended up getting cancer and dying. And the girl turned 18, and she insisted she have a meeting with that uncle at the prison. So they went through all the steps that you have to do to get that arranged, and there's quite a few steps. Most of my cases are before trial, so we don't get into the prison. This was a prison case. They brought the guy in. She's sitting there. The girl's sitting there. A young woman is sitting there in the room. The guard brings the uncle in, and as soon as he sits down, the victim gets up and runs out of the room. And the social workers and the prison people are all going, oh no, this is terrible. We shouldn't have done this. And they went out to get the young woman, and she's, in the next room. And they said, we're so sorry we put you through this. We should have followed our own common sense. And she said, oh, no, you got it wrong. Oh, I want to go back there and talk with him. I just wanted to get up and leave because I couldn't get up and leave before. I wanted to show myself that I could get up and leave. I was free to leave. And so it became a very powerful meeting. where she told him how much harm he had caused. And he, of course, then apologized like you'd expect him to. But imagine there was a case where if you follow the rule and you don't let child sexual abuse victims meet with perpetrators, she wouldn't have had the opportunity to move on. And there's a phrase that I've heard, and I'll try and share it with you and convey the meaning of it. Victims get their life back. I don't know how else to say it. They get their life back. It's like they can close that chapter of their book and move on. They met, and again, I call it alchemy because I don't know. Someone much brighter than I did would have to put the pieces together. But something happened there. And this person, you could just see the physical change in them. It's the courage, the power of truth, the power of suffering, and the wisdom that comes from it. Something happens when you have that kind of confrontation. And so, long story to answer your question, why do victims meet? You'd have to talk to one.
Okay. Oh, but this is powerful. It's getting at something very deep in the human soul about closure. And the words that come to me is that the criminal justice system is inhumane to the victims as well.
No question. No question. Yeah.
I mean, I guess the question is what happens in these rooms? Because you're saying that this is spontaneous, that some of this happens. Could you describe how a circle is set up? And is it that you always have people who are up for it? Maybe that's the difference. Is it that people come in very confident about that kind of process? Or are you talking about people who've never tried it? I mean, are there police officers who are cynical about this?
Oh, yes, very much so. But I'll tell you, I want to sort of tell you the stories. They kind of hopefully explain themselves better than I can sort of articulate them. What brought me out of retirement, when I was a prosecutor, I never had a chance to be a facilitator because you're an attorney and you legally, ethically can't meet with the defendant, at least not without the defendant's attorney being there. Well, we don't want the defense attorney sitting in the circle. I'm not going to sit in the circle. So we had to hire mediators and facilitators. So I retired and I started this company, this distance learning company that I have. But the George Floyd murder took place. And I had moved from the jurisdiction where I was county attorney to, where being near grandkids and my kids and stuff. And the George Floyd murder took place. And I saw all these arrests, white police officers arresting black demonstrators. And I called the local prosecutor. And I had not been retired so long that she wouldn't remember that I was one of that group years earlier. And I said, let me tell you about restorative justice, because these are not cases that you want to take to a jury. I'm in a town where it has a University of Iowa. So we're in a red state with a very blue jurisdiction, very blue county. There's no way that Johnson County juries are going to convict black demonstrators after George Floyd's murder. No way. And so you got all these arrests. And what are you going to do? You're going to spend $100,000 per defendant trying these cases just to have the jury come back and say not guilty. And so one of the cases, the first case that I did, the demonstrators had taken over Walmart and they were crossing the interstate, or actually they were going underneath the interstate to get over to the shopping mall that had a sporting goods store where there were guns and ammunition, which the police interpreted, oh boy, what if those demonstrators, they're peaceful now, but what if they got the guns and ammunition? What would happen then? So a police officer arrives at the main entrance to the mall, and he's the first one to arrive, and it's got 2 lanes going in, 2 lanes coming out, and he parks his civilian car on the outside lane, and then he gets out. He's wearing a dark uniform, no reflecting vest or anything else. He gets out of his car to start stopping with his flashlight oncoming vehicles using the inside lane. The first one nearly runs over him, and he jumps on his hood, and he's able to escape being struck. I think he's got 16 years on the police force. He's a police sergeant. And he's convinced that this demonstrator tried to run over him. So, of course, they get the demonstrator stopped inside the parking lot of the mall. And now she's charged with assault with a deadly weapon. The county attorney calls the police officer and says, would you like to meet with this person? And the police officer immediately said, yes. And he said that the reason he said yes is he had never in his life been so close to being run over or killed as he was at that moment. His wife and their 2 children, he thought in that moment that he was nearly struck, that he would never see his wife and 2 kids again. He wanted to share that with this woman, and so we're sitting in circle, and she's there with her support person, who's her husband. The police officer comes in. He's the victim and the arresting officer. Most cops, I make them wear civilian clothes. They can't display a gun. And he's there, and he doesn't have any support person, but we do have a community rep there, a woman whose husband's a fireman, but she's a community conscience. She's sitting in the circle, but there's only 6 of us. But when he hears her explain, with tears in her eyes, there was no way she would have ever run over him intentionally. That just something she wouldn't do. She's a mother of 3. She works 2 jobs. Her husband's working an extra job to put food on the table for their 2 kids. And her dream is to become a doctor. She's going to go to medical school. And she has absolutely no intention, no will to hurt anybody. And she apologized to him. He stood up from the circle. Now, he's not holding the talking piece. She's holding the talking piece. He stands up and walks across the circle and hugs her. And what he says isn't very politically correct. What he says to her, I no longer think you're an animal. Harsh words. But think of what he's saying. He's saying he must have thought that. He had demonized her so much as the person that nearly killed him that he didn't see her as a human being. And so what is he saying? He's saying, that's what I thought before. I don't think that now. And she pulled the coat that she was wearing over her head, almost like a cocoon, and just started quivering, releasing her emotions. And he's hugging her while they're having this experience. And of course, the result of the case was dismissal. The case had been pending. She was absolutely wanted her life back, for what she'd been put through, being arrested, strip searched, having to post a bond, having her kids know that she can't come home because she's in jail. And all of this emotion comes out. And it was, I can only say this word, beautiful. It was beautiful. And this police officer, when he left that circle, so we dismissed the case. A lot of times the court costs are crippling, hundreds of dollars for this and that, and the court-appointed attorney. In the cases that I use restorative justice for, when we dismiss the case, the court costs go to the state. They just write it off. They don't need to be inflicted on the defendant, all right? They've got enough to worry about getting their life together and getting a job. So the case is dismissed, and now we discuss community service. She ends up volunteering for community service, and this is how you get the cop, how you get the police officer to buy in. We're saying, Mr. Officer, instead of putting her in jail and ruining her life, why don't we have her do community service? And everything in the circle is done by consensus. Everybody has to agree. And so what ultimately was the result was 96 hours of community service working as a teacher's aide at a school. But it wasn't just any school. It was a school in Cedar Rapids, Iowa called Children of Promise. And those were children whose parents were in jail or prison who needed mentoring. And that's the work that she did. And the last thing I want to tell you is when the police officer left the meeting, he called the prosecuting attorney's office. This is a guy with 16 years as a police officer. And he told the prosecutor, I want every one of my cases handled using restorative justice. I no longer want to go to trial. I don't want to have juries. I don't want to have the presumption of innocence. I want to just talk to the people that I charge so we can come up with something better. So I call it an acquired taste. Restorative justice is an acquired taste. We got 3,142 counties in the United States, counting Hawaii and Alaska. 3,142. Only 50 county attorneys use this, and really only about 30 of them use it seriously. And many of them are held back because they don't want to lose the support of the police officers. And so if I can get a police officer to sit in circle and see what justice feels like, and there's a line from the musical Hamilton where Aaron Burr sings, I want to be in the room where it happened. When a police officer gets to be in the room where justice is created and doesn't find out later that there was a plea bargain, that's agency. Now you've given the police officer agency over his involvement. And the police officer, Mitch Seymour, could have vetoed the outcome that I described to you in that case. He didn't. He was advocating the very things that we came up with. And so I use alchemy, Phoenix, because I don't know how to explain it. I don't know how to explain it. All I know is that when you give people an opportunity to be human beings, sometimes they really are.
Has it ever gone wrong? Has it ever gone badly?
I can't think of a case that's gone badly. When we do, you wanted me to describe the process. I'll just take you through steps real quick. The county attorney looks at the case. Every county attorney, even in a county attorney that's got one county attorney, they have to screen the case. People don't realize that the elected prosecutor in the county where they live is the chief law enforcement person. So when the police make an arrest, the prosecutor can dismiss it. He can add charges. He or she can add charges, dismiss charges, do whatever they want. That's the stage at which you want the prosecutor to consider restorative justice. So every prosecutor in the country is screening the case. So in this county, Johnson County, they screen the case and they say, this looks like a possible case for restorative justice. They call the person who's been harmed. If there's no person harmed other than the cop, they call the cop. Do you want to do restorative justice? Yes, no. If the victim says no, end of story. If there's a victim and the victim says yes, and the arresting officer says no, we're still going to go forward because the victim wants it. The prosecutor then calls a defense attorney. Believe me, every defense attorney in the world, I haven't met everyone in the world. I'm going to tell you, every defense attorney I've ever met in 46, almost 47 years of being in the criminal justice system, if they're offered an opportunity for their client to go through restorative justice, they jump at it. Imagine what defense attorney in the world is going to get a better outcome than a dismissal of the case with the court costs being paid by the state. Nobody, unless it's a false charge. And then the prosecutor should have been screening the case and saying, there's no case here. We need to go forward with the case. Anyway, prosecutor then talks to the defense attorney. He says, yes. The prosecutor promises the defense attorney that nothing that his client says at the circle is going to be used against him. So we have yes, yes. Prosecutor then calls me or emails me and says, hey, I want you to look at this case. You decide if it's a good case for restorative justice. I call the victim. I call the police officer. I call the defense attorney and make sure it's clear with him that I talked to his client. When I do that, I want them to agree. All three people, they were at the crime, either the victim or the offender. They were at the crime. You don't need 43 witnesses to find out what happened. And that's what you do. You ask them what happened. I do not want to use the circle for a mini trial on who said this, who did that, what's the evidence. So if they all agree on what happened, then I call the prosecutor back and say, hey, I'm ready to go. And I ask each of the people who they would like to be with them in the circle. So we'll have support people for the victim, support people for the perpetrator, and the cop never once. If we can get the cop, 50% of the time I get the cop, 50% of the time I don't. So that's the circle. I've got a facility where I'm on the board of directors, and it's a space. I've used schoolhouses. I've used churches. You can use the bank conference room. You can meet anywhere. And if you can't find a good place, call the county attorney, and the county attorney will call somebody up and say, hey, can we find a room where you guys can all meet? It's never a problem finding a place to meet. So when we actually sit down, we do introductions, go around the circle. I introduce the talking piece. We do talking piece so they get in the habit of using the talking piece. You only talk when you're holding the talking piece. Sometimes the facilitator, if people are getting along really good, we can set the talking piece on the floor and we can actually have an open discussion. But the three things that we do, we have three questions that make up the Restorative Justice Conference. We ask, what happened? And we already know what happened. But I want the perpetrator and the victim and the police to all say it, because the support people are there thinking there's going to be an argument here. There's going to be a dispute about the facts. Everybody agrees on what happened. The next question we ask is, what impact did it have on you? And everybody is impacted. Even the police officer. We had a case where the police officer was impacted. He told the defendant and the preacher that was with him and the defendant's mom, I didn't want to arrest your son. I did not want to arrest this guy. The police officer is saying, my son's birthday's the next day. I needed a good night's sleep. I wanted to be able to party with my family. If I had to arrest him, I'm going to spend 4 hours where I was supposed to be home. It's 11 o'clock at night. I'm going to spend another 4 hours doing the police reports and the complaint and affidavit, and I'm not going to be ready for my birthday tomorrow. So even the police officer is given a sad story about his own life being impacted. And everybody's feeling sorry for the police officer, right? And like I said, you can't make up these stories. So anyway, what's the impact? The second question is, what impact did it have? And once we go around the circle enough times, and I never go around fewer than 3 times, so everybody gets everything possibly said. The last question is, what do we do to make it right? And then we discuss it. And I go to a flip chart and we write down the ideas of what we could do to make it right. And most often it involves community service, dismissal of the charge. We don't impose community service. We talk with the perpetrator. What would you like to do? What would you enjoy doing? Whether it's work at Habitat for Humanity, work at the food bank. We got a guy that works at a Salvation Army, sorting clothes that people bring in. Whatever that perpetrator wants, we honor that. We also look for whether there's a substance abuse problem and where can we connect that person up with substance abuse counseling and treatment. And we look at mental illness and where they can get counseling. We look for a support person that can monitor them, usually someone in the circle who keeps track of, did they do their community service? Do they have a job? And then, because you're asking me if we've ever had a bad outcome, it's my habit to stop at the grocery store before I go into these conferences and I buy a big container of donut holes. They're like little donuts, only they're big, because there's such a good vibe. There's such a good vibe. We don't know what to do with ourselves. We're so united. We're so happy. And so we had to create a ritual to create closure so we could say goodbye because no one wants to leave. Almost all of these programs, all these things take about 2 hours. And imagine in 2 hours, we did something that the criminal justice system would take maybe 2 years to do. And if the person goes to prison here in Iowa City, I'm in a university town, but across town, they have a correctional facility. It costs about $78,000 a year per inmate per year. We could send that inmate to 3 years of college if that's what we resolved for the kind of money we would spend if we put them in prison and used 2 years of criminal justice resources in attorneys, social workers, probation officers, parole officers, name it. I mean, you can see you got me on a horse and I'm starting to ride here. When you said, have you ever had a bad outcome? What I was going to tell you is when I set the guidelines and I explained the talking piece and I explained the process that the conference is going to do, I give them guidelines, the use of the talking piece. But I also say the facilitator has the right to disband the circle. I say that. I've never done it. But I always say it just so anybody that knows we haven't signed a lifetime contract to sit here. If things aren't going right, I keep that option open to disband the circle. I've never used it. That's what made your question is hard. I don't think I've used it. I know I haven't used it. We've always had good outcomes. We've had 2 outcomes where the county attorney, see, we send the agreement that we write up, what would make it right. We write that up and we all sign it. It used to be we'd only have the perpetrator and the victim sign it, but there's usually such a big vibe. Everybody wants to put their name on it. Okay. So it's just too powerful and too positive. We've never had to disband. Oh, the 2 cases. The county attorney has a duty, an ethical and a legal responsibility to pursue justice. And so the case goes back to the county attorney for approval, because if he's going to walk into court or she's going to walk into court and say to the judge, we're going to dismiss this case, the judge might want to know why. Why are you dismissing the case? And most judges don't care. They just want to get the case off their docket, unless there's been a guilty plea, which none of my cases, we don't get that far. So there's no guilty plea. So the judge usually goes along with it. We've had 2 cases where the county attorney wanted to modify the agreement and didn't dismiss the charges. And that created a lot of anxiety by the people in the circle. We felt that we knew what justice was. And the county attorney, one of the cases involved a gun. And the prosecutor said, I'm not going to dismiss a case totally. We'll reduce the charge. We'll give him probation, but we're not going to dismiss a gun charge. And if the county attorney could have sat in on that circle, nobody wanted the gun charge. I mean, people have guns. People have guns, okay? And if they have them legally, why does that become a turning point? But there were 2 cases that I won't say ended badly in the circle. They just left a bad taste in our mouth when the county attorney didn't go along with those 2 cases.
This is very inspiring. And I wonder if you could speak to what can a person do to bring more of this into the world? It's going to save us money. It sounds like it's healing for the victim. It reduces recidivism, which is people continuing on a life of crime. How can people get involved and support this?
That's why I actually teach a webinar. I teach a webinar to inform people about what restorative justice is. Secondly, to inspire them. I try to get them to have an acquired taste for restorative justice because there's a leverage point. And the third thing is an instruction. The third part of my webinar is an instruction on what they should do. So you're going to get the Cliff Notes version of what I think they should do. Every person, in the county, 90% of criminal cases are prosecuted in the state court. What that means is anybody that is a citizen that votes in their county, that lives in a county, knows where the courthouse is. If to only pay their taxes or register to vote or whatever, they know where the courthouse is. In their county, that's where the criminal justice event is happening, right there. 90% of criminal cases are happening in their county court. In every county, there is one person in charge of that case. When I tell you there's 2.3 million people in prison, when I tell you there's a 30 to 50% recidivism rate, those are numbers, but each one represents a case. There's a case, and behind each case, there's a prosecuting attorney, and they're elected. They're elected. And if you wanted to get my attention when I was county attorney and you knocked on my door or called me on the phone, they said, Mr. Partridge, I voted for you. I voted for you. And if you want me to keep voting for you, I want you to take a look at restorative justice. Now, no one needed to have that conversation with me. Someone at church gave me this article about restorative justice. Okay. That's how they got my attention. But imagine there's a county here in Iowa where 6 people were citizens of Polk County. And there were 4 people running for county attorney that year, 4 years ago. And these 6 people wrote a letter and they sent it to each of the 4 candidates. And they said, we want to know before we decide who to vote for, we want to know, do you support restorative justice? And 3 of the 4 decided to look it up and read what it was about and said, yeah. And the other guy didn't. Well, one of the 3 got elected, Kimberly, I'll say Hall, but I'm not sure. One of the 3 got elected, and she has one of the most progressive restorative justice programs in the country right now. She probably has 30. I'm here in Johnson County, myself and a colleague. She's got 30 restorative justice facilitators, 30. If they can handle a case in 2 hours that would normally take 2 years in the court system, imagine how attractive that is for managing a caseload. I haven't even mentioned the caseload. When I was county attorney, I never had more than 50 or 60 cases on my desk. You know what the rate is now? 500 cases. The prosecutors have 500 cases, and they have about 10 trial dates. So they got 490 cases. If they just looked at it, if the county attorney just looked at it from a numbers standpoint, instead of coming up with formulas for how to handle drunk drivings, bad checks, shoplifting, they don't even know the defendants. They don't even know the perpetrator. They don't know anything about the case. It's just a case number. So back to my agenda. If you're an elected person in a county and you're hearing my voice right now, you could change the whole trajectory of criminal justice in your county if you're not one of the 30 that's using it right now by just asserting your right as a voter and telling the county attorney, if you want my vote, and I'm telling you, they listen. That gets their attention. But I'll tell you who also gets their attention. If someone is a crime victim, and I had a case, and the crime victim used their right to testify at the sentencing, and they got up on the witness stand, and what they said, when the prosecutor said, okay, you wanted to be here and testify at the sentencing, yeah, what do you want to say? And the witness, the victim said, I want to talk directly to the defendant. And the judge says, well, that's why you're here. Talk. And she says, no, I want to talk with him where I can have a dialogue, where I can hear what he has to say and he can hear what I have to say. And I know he understands me. And they didn't know what to do. And the victim said, I've heard there's a guy named Partridge down in Johnson County that does this stuff. And so the judge, and I don't like this, the judge ordered the defendant to participate. I do not like that. That violates my concept of agency. I want the defendant to say, I want to meet, or the victim to say, I want to meet. But anyway, court order, the circle consists of three people. Me, the woman who was hit, she had a baby in the car, and the guy was a drunk driver and he hit their car. And they sat in circle and we passed the talking piece around. What happened? Everybody agreed. What impact did it have? The defendant started crying when he found out that she had a baby in the car. Someone had told him that, but it didn't quite sink in. And here she is telling him how she'd gone through all of for 8 years to have a baby. And this was the baby, and he nearly killed them. So he starts crying. And then, of course, what are we going to do to make it right? Well, we went through the community service and all that. Here's how it ended. Her name is Liz Aragua, was the victim, and David Wilbur's the defendant. They wanted me to take pictures of them hugging each other. And so he's a fast order cook at a local cafe, and he's got her picture hugging him next to when he puts the orders up. So he reminds himself every time he puts food up there for the waitress to take it out or waiter to take it out, he's looking at her. And she took his picture with her hugging him, and it sits next to her on her desk. She's a criminal defense attorney in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And she told me she wants me to use her name. So you guys know she really exists. And sort of that's how that plays out. So anyway, when you're talking about the stages of the restorative justice, I think I kind of covered it and maybe a lot more here.
Hell yeah, you did cover it. But does it have to be on the witness chance? If you're a victim of a crime, can you make a request to the prosecutor that they use restorative justice before it ever even reaches the court?
Let me just put it this way then. The victim that picks up the phone and calls the prosecutor, I can promise you, is going to get a call back. That's why the prosecutor exists. He thinks he's a representative. She thinks she's representing the interests of the victim. The victim has enormous standing with the prosecutor. The victim's going to get a call back. And one victim can bring about, in fact, that Liz Aragua case, I get a call from, his name is Nick. I can't think of his full name, but it's Nick. And he's sending his prosecutor next month to one of my workshops. So he got the message. He's trying to acquire the taste. And once you acquire the taste, so victims enormous. But let's get real political. When I wanted to raise money when I was county attorney, they had a drug task force, or we needed to raise money for a school project. And the county attorney is a welcome speaker at service clubs. And I'm talking about Rotary, Kiwanis, Lions Club. And you think, what do they have to do with restorative justice? These service clubs exist to make their communities better places. Every one of them meets once a week, and every one of them needs a 15-minute program from somebody in the community that can tell them how they can get involved and make the community a better place. Now, if you let me loose for 15 minutes with a service club, I know I can at least get a phone call from the president of the service club. And sometimes the county attorney is in the service club, and he's listening and she's listening to, why don't we have this? You're telling me we could save $78,000 a year on our taxes by not keeping someone in a cage? What are you doing about this? And now imagine he or she's not only got the social pressure, but these people vote. They vote. And if you really wanted to get hardball with the county attorney in your jurisdiction, if you really wanted to play hardball, the county attorney has a budget. And in Iowa, the group that controls his budget is called the Board of Supervisors. And imagine if you had 5 minutes to explain to the Board of Supervisors that they won't have to build a new jail this year or next year or the year after that that's going to cost the county $40 million. They're not going to have to do that if they just encourage their county attorney to start using restorative justice. The people that worked in prison with me, the lowest number I ever heard was 50% of the people in prison don't need to be there. The highest number I've heard is 70% of the people don't need to be in prison. 70%. That we could deal with them as substance abuse treatment people, or people who need mental health counseling, or people who just needed a job and they wouldn't need to be in prison. And we could get off, my dad calls it, they put their money on the wrong horse. We've put our criminal justice system money on the wrong horse. There's a place for serial killers. There's a place for predators. There's a place for people that kidnap children and harm children. And we feed them like bears. We put them away. We lock them up. That's where they need to be to protect us. But that's hardly the number of people. That's not 2.3 million people. If it was, we'd all be ordering our groceries, to be delivered. We'd never step out of the house.
I'm just thinking that what you're saying, that for a lot of what is in the prisons, they could be easily handled. And maybe there could be something that was done by those harder cases, but we can leave that for another podcast. But what we're focusing is on because I think maybe that's what happens is sometimes the discussion focuses on those people who are perpetrators of violent crimes and really the psychopaths. But what you're trying to give voice to is the many people who just had a bad, like you said, they're substance abusers, they're people who were desperate for money and chose the wrong way of getting it. And there's a lot we can do for creating a more restorative, a healing space for them.
You're exactly right. That's exactly right.
I love this. And I love that you've given our listeners a way to move this forward in their own communities. And we'll be putting in the show notes the links to, because I attended your webinar and it was very inspiring. And this is why I have you here.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. And for the people in Bay Area, there's Restorative Justice Oakland. There's lots of restoratives. We're one of the better ones. We have a lot of restorative justice work. And then also, what's the name of your webinar?
I call it One Giant Leap for Criminal Justice Reform. And that's how I kind of perceive it. It's one giant leap. You can imagine in one county, if this one prosecutor just started doing that. There's so many stories. We don't have time to get into them, but I love to tell the stories because they're all so positive. They have such happy endings. And I'll tell you, it reinforces the cop. They have all these programs for creating community policing and officer-friendly programs and stuff. Nothing changes a human being like these circles when the police officer starts looking at the people that and the real major phrase I'll use is the criminal justice system creates we versus them. We versus them. The prosecutor versus the defense. The police don't feel part of the community. They feel like it's we versus them. The community is against them. And this restorative justice breaks that down. And it restores a police officer. Most police officers my company provides a majority of the police officers, I think, or a substantial number of police officers in the state of Missouri and the place in Iowa. And I've done this training since the early 80s, but my company has been, since 1999. Police officers become police officers because they want to make a difference, not so they can become Nazi fascists and hurt people. Police want to make a difference, but they lose that about the 8th year mark. They become cynical. The system is against them. They get into the nail 'em, jail 'em. If the prosecutor plea bargains a case, they hate the prosecutor and they hate the defendant and they hate the public. And it's a horribly toxic thing. And if restorative justice does one thing, it changes the we versus them equation into us. They change it into community instead of a we versus them. And that, I guess, in a nutshell, is what really is the alchemy, to watch the we versus them become the us. And it doesn't matter. The race becomes irrelevant. Everything becomes irrelevant except relationship. And so anyway.
What you're saying resonates a lot. This is a great way to end our time here, because this is exactly what LIFT is behind and what I'm personally passionate about. LIFT is about the next economy movement and creating an economy that works for the benefit of all life. And you're showing us another way that we can be working for that. Also, in the work I do, it's all about relationship. How do you use non-punitive? Doesn't have to just be, it's in the criminal justice system, it's also in our lives. And how do we have those conversations with people so that we're moving towards restoring trust instead of living with division? And so in my workshops, I teach nonviolent and collaboration, and I also offer different facilitated conversations and mediations for people who've had difficult interactions. And then also we want our listeners to know that they can follow Lift Economy on media at Lift Economy. Visit Lift Economy to sign up for our monthly newsletter. There's also the monthly newsletter that I do, News from Phoenix. And if you go to Lift Economy and look at leadership offerings. How do you want to be a leader in this new world, one that's using some of these skills? And you can learn about them in Next Economy Leadership. You could also find out about our new podcast, Beyond the Bee, hosted by Ryan Honeyman and Emmy Allison. And yeah, thanks for listening, and definitely look at the show notes for more information about Gerald Partridge. I'm so glad to have you with us. And that's it. All right.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
You're very welcome.
Hey, Next Economy Now listeners. If you enjoyed this conversation and are looking to dive even deeper into the B Corp movement, you'll love our new podcast, Beyond the Bee, hosted by Lift Economy's Emmy Allison and me, Ryan Honeyman. Beyond the Bee is your insider's guide to the B Corp movement. You'll learn about the new B Corp standards shaping our community, how the B Corp movement is navigating the various tensions and challenges of growth, and how businesses like Patagonia are putting their commitments to people and planet in practice. Check out our latest episodes and free resources at lifteconomy.com/beyond. You can also subscribe to Beyond the Bee on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening.
Hey, Next Economy Now listeners. If you haven't gathered from our podcast already, we're really passionate about helping to build a future that works for all of us. If you share that passion and are looking to deepen your practice, we want to share a few ways to connect and learn directly with the Lift Economy team. You've likely heard of the Next Economy MBA, which we started almost 10 years ago and have trained over 800 alumni through the fundamentals of business design from a regenerative and just perspective. New this year, our Next Economy Fund will embody our values of democratically allocating resources to Next Economy entrepreneurs that are part of our alumni network. We've also launched 2 trainings that came directly out of our MBA community's desire for more in-depth skill building around 2 key topics: organizational leadership and personal life design. Next Economy Leadership is a workshop series designed to help culture leaders at purpose-driven organizations move towards full embodiment of their values. And Next Economy Living is a 6-month training designed to help everyday citizens and consumers take actionable next steps to transform their local communities to align with a future that works for all of us. You can hear about all of these offerings and other ways we're supporting the Next Economy movement at lifteconomy.com/next steps. We deeply appreciate you being a listener of our show, especially in a cultural moment when attention and community are hard to come by. We're amazed by the community of folks we get to learn alongside through these offerings and hope you'll consider joining us.